Okay, so picture this. It's late 2025. For months, everyone's been talking about the economy cooling down, things getting back to normal, and then, bam, out of nowhere, the economy hits the gas and inflation comes roaring back. It caught pretty much every expert completely by surprise. So today, we're going to dive into this economic mystery and figure out what on earth happened. Right, so this is the central question, the big head scratcher. Why? All the forecasts, all the models were pointing in one direction, but reality just veered off into a totally different one. Let's play detective and piece together the clues to solve this thing. And just look at how stark this difference was. The story in mid-2025 was all about inflation easing off, the economy gently slowing down. But fast forward a few months, underlying inflation had jumped all the way to 3.4%. This wasn't just a little off. It was a fundamental misreading of which way the wind was blowing. So, every good investigation starts with the most obvious clues, right? We're going to begin by looking at the specific parts of the economy where prices first started to creep up. Think of these as our initial suspects in this inflation whodunit. And right away, three areas really stood out. First, you've got your usual suspects, travel and fuel prices. They're always a bit wild. But the really telling clues came from two massive consumer sectors, housing and retail. Something was definitely changing there. And here we get a key piece of evidence straight from the Reserve Bank. For a while, home builders were throwing in deals and discounts just to get people to buy. But then suddenly demand picked back up. And what happened? They didn't need those promotions anymore, the deals dried up, and poof, prices effectively went up for buyers. And it wasn't just housing. Retailers were singing the exact same tune. Shoppers were out in force again, wallets open, so those big sale signs started to disappear. For you and me, that meant fewer bargains and a higher bill at the checkout. These sectors were like the canaries in the coal mine, signaling something bigger was happening. But here's the thing. Those price hikes in housing and retail, they were really just symptoms. The real story, the deeper cause, was that the entire economy was feeling the heat. It was running way, way hotter than anyone had realized. And this brings us to a really important idea, economy-wide capacity pressure. The best way to think about it is to imagine a restaurant kitchen during a surprise Saturday night rush. The orders are flying in faster than the chefs can cook. It's chaos. That's exactly what was happening to the economy. It was trying to do too much all at once. And we have the receipts for this. Business surveys from the time tell a really clear story. Capacity utilization, basically how much of their full potential businesses were using, was super high. And at the same time, tons of companies were saying that just finding enough workers was a huge roadblock to growing. That kitchen was absolutely slammed. On top of all that, for every single thing a business produced, the labor cost was going up. We call this unit labor costs. And when a business's expenses go up, what do? They pass those costs on to us, the consumers, in the form of higher prices. It was a classic textbook inflation signal. Okay, so the engine was overheating. We've established that. The next logical question is, what was flooring the gas pedal? What was the fuel behind all of this incredibly strong demand? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of four powerful factors all hitting at the same time. You had a global economy that was surprisingly tough, financial conditions that weren't as tight as people thought, households that had more money to spend, and this wild, sudden boom in business investment. Let's start with what was happening overseas. A lot of people were worried about a global slowdown, but it just didn't happen. In fact, things like the AI and tech boom absolutely supercharged some of our biggest trading partners. And for a country like Australia, that means more demand for our exports and more money flowing in. And then there was this other really fascinating piece of the puzzle, a huge surge in business investment. A big part of this came from what we call lumpy spending. We're talking massive one-off projects, like fitting out these enormous data centers to power the tech boom. This was a huge and frankly unforeseen shot of adrenaline for the economy. So we've identified the suspects, we've figured out the motive, we pretty much know why inflation took off. Now let's turn to the official verdict. What do the authorities think is going to happen next? So here's the expected path forward. After that surprise 3.4% number, the forecast is for inflation to actually keep rising and peak around the middle of 2026. After that, it's expected to be a long, slow grind back down, hopefully getting close to that 2 to 3% target by mid-2028. Now, there is a giant assumption behind this entire forecast, And it's a big one. It's that higher interest rates are going to do their job. The whole idea is that they'll cool off that red-hot demand, slow the economy down to a more sustainable pace, and finally, give that overwhelmed kitchen a chance to breathe. So, let's just sum it all up. The mystery of the 2025 inflation spike, it wasn't one single culprit. It really was a perfect storm. You had these specific price pressures in places like housing and retail, but they were lit on fire by a much bigger surge in demand across the whole economy. A surge fueled by everything from a global tech boom to local data centers. And that really leaves us with one final, nagging question. This whole episode was a huge reminder that forecasting the economy is incredibly hard. If this perfect storm could brew up and catch everyone by surprise, it really makes you wonder, what's the next big surprise lurking just around the corner?